Okay, so this will begin our exploration into middle adulthood. This lecture will cover the cognitive, biological aspects, and the next one more of the social and personality aspects of middle adulthood. So before we begin, unlike other stages, which really kind of have pretty clear-cut indications as to when they've entered it and when they're transitioning out of it, middle adulthood is a little bit differently. There's really particularly in our day and age, there's really no clear-cut way of determining if somebody is in middle adulthood or not. For example, we typically, think of middle adulthood, being somewhere in the 40s. But what about a 41-year-old that has a newborn child? Would they be considered middle adult? Whereas, this is typically something that we would expect to see more somebody in young adulthood. But with our, medical advances, this is not an unheard of thing. It's not unusual for this to happen. Or, we talked about, in days past, somebody would pick a career and stick with it for the rest of their lives. Whereas now, we may see a 43-year-old or even a 50-year-old, 60-year-old in a job training program, learning new skills and switching careers. So some of these things that have really in times past kind of given us cues as to when people have been entering and exiting this particular stage. It's not as clear cut in our day and age. So some of the things that we look at would be, their family, how they've defined it, where they're at in terms of that development. But again, it's all going to be individual based. So really, it's almost like the individual has to look at their own life and determine whether or not they fall into this stage. So if you think about the discussion we had previously on age, those different components, the biological, psychological, and social, really have relevance here in this stage. So where is the person at in terms of their social status? Physically, where are they? So again, that falls into that biological component. Are they a young 41-year-old or are they an old 41-year-old? As well as their psychological age as well. How old they feel, and then social status. Who are they relating with? So it's really kind of up in the air where this begins and ends. Okay, so midlife. Is this the prime time? Is this the best days of a person's life? Or is it really kind of the beginning of the downhill slope, the beginning of the end? Typically, 40th birthdays, break out the black balloons. Sometimes you do that at the 50th birthdays. So is this really, the downhill? Probably at one point it was, but for a lot of people, this is really kind of the prime time of their lives. They've, worked enough to where typically they're going to have enough money to do some of the things that they want to do. Again, that's not the case for everybody, certainly. But they also may start getting the time as they've moved on in their careers in order to be able to do some of these activities that they want to do. So really, it's going to depend on that experience of the individual in terms of just where they're at, how their life has been, and where they are currently. Some people, when they've entered midlife, can feel depressed, that dissatisfaction, inner turmoil. So I just hit the 40 mark last year. And so for me, I know sometime within the next decade, I will have for certain hit my halfway point through life. And as I look back at how quickly, this first half of my life has gone by, it's kind of scary for me to think how quickly the second half is going to go by. Now, granted, it's almost at each stage of your development, you have to come to terms with your own mortality. And so it's not like I'm saying my life is over, but certainly I'm at that halfway mark at some point, and I have to be able to come to terms with that in order to not feel that depression, inner turmoil, or dissatisfaction. So it's almost like, as we'll talk about, the last stage of Erik Erikson's model is integrity versus despair, and a lot of that is looking back at your life and looking at what you've done and if you've accomplished some of the things that you wanted to, and that's going to kind of fall into this how you feel about entering the midlife stage. So some people, looking back, may feel safe, settled, and feel like they're in their prime of their life. Again, it's just going to be dependent on that individual experience. The one thing that does start to happen, though, is physical health begins to decline around this time. It's just kind of weird. They don't give you a heads up of some of the aches and pains that you develop. It's a very peculiar thing. When you wake up and realize that you have to adjust how you sleep, where you sleep, positions you sleep, because you just can't do that anymore. And so it's very interesting. Even some of your physical activity is going to differ as well. I've mentioned previously that I'm a runner, and before, when I would run, I'd have shin splints, my knees, hips would hurt. And there's one point, probably even before I hit midlife, or as I'm defining midlife, 40, even before I hit that, I was experiencing those pains. And so I had to switch up my running style in order to accommodate that. And since I've switched it up, I haven't experienced those same aches and pains. So, you have to make accommodations. And part of that is you just have to accept that your body's getting older. And, you have to make some accommodations for that. And as long as you're accepting of that, you can live a happy, healthy midlife. And so it's really, even though there can be some poor health within that, or at least a change of health, it's important to just accept that and do what you need to do in order to continue the activities that you want to. All right, so the midlife crisis. There's been a lot of debate whether or not this really happens. It's the traditional model is, somebody hits midlife, realizes that they don't have all they want, so they go out and buy the sports car and leave their family and in favor of somebody that's much younger. That doesn't happen too frequently. That's really more of the exception than the rule. Most people kind of go into midlife without any real sort of crisis, or it's a smooth transition for a lot of people. So that's kind of the difference between these two different models. With Levinson, his model suggests that this is a common thing for men to go through, and it usually revolves around either, some combination of these four things. So being old versus young, I'm old now, I'm not young anymore, so I'm going to try to do those things that help me embrace my youth. Masculine versus feminine, being destructive versus constructive, and then that attachment to others versus being alienated. And so, midlife crisis is, according to Levinson, is going to, revolve around one of these four things or a combination of these four things. The transition model really is probably how it happens for most people. Rather than being disruptive, as I said, you just kind of move into this stage. And if there are crises that happen, typically they're around specific events. So it might be, a health crisis. It might be, the oldest child graduating and moving into college. So these would really be more, kind of situational, developmentally appropriate crises that happen. And that's more from the transition model. And as I've said probably 3 or 4 times now, most people probably fall under this transition model as compared to, Levinson's, a big disruption type model. So research does suggest that midlife is the best time of life. So again, it's more of that transition. Those that tend to have that Levinson-based midlife crisis are those that have avoided introspection. I really think introspection is important throughout the life, to really look at your life. Are you going in the direction that you want to go? What have you accomplished so far, and is that satisfactory to you? Rather than, repressing it, pushing it off, not being too afraid for whatever reason, to look at your life, to look at, where you've been and where you possibly might be going. I really think it's important to take that time to really look. And doing that, probably avoid a midlife crisis later on. So again, there's that denial. Those that have the crises use denial about their changing bodies and lives. So as I said earlier, it's just important to accept the changes that happen. And some of these changes do start to happen in early adulthood. I think they just become a little more pronounced as you move on to middle adulthood. And then also those that do experience a midlife crisis also tend to be more upper class. I don't know why that is. There's probably a number of factors. That's just kind of what the research suggests happens for where people are having midlife crises and where they're coming from. So the physical changes are the most obvious that happen during middle adulthood. We'll talk about some of these things here in just a few minutes. And as I think I've talked about, at different points throughout this course, it's important at any stage of development really to consider about what you think about aging and dying. And it's going to change. Your philosophies, your thoughts are really going to change about aging and dying, depending on what developmental area that you're in. So again, the existentialists think that you really cannot live life until you've come to terms with your mortality. And as I've experienced, at least through my life, that this is not something that you arrive at and you're good to go the rest of your life. It really is a continual process of thinking about that. Not focusing on it to where you're super depressed and you don't want to get out of bed and you wonder what's the point, because it's all going to end anyway. But more of just thinking about it in terms of, I do really have a limited time here, and what am I going to do with it? Am I doing what I want to do at this exact moment, this last month, this last year, whatever it is? Am I doing what I want to be doing? So again, it's important to have that introspection and really think about, some of these deeper, tougher issues that not a lot of people like to think about. Well, probably most people don't like to think about it, but it's important to think about it. All right, so some of the physical changes that take place. There's the decline in visual acuity, which sucks, except for distant objects. So it usually is things more up close, which is where bifocals come in. I hit the stage last year where I finally had to have the talk with my eye doctor that I needed some sort of reading glasses, and luckily technology is really awesome. I am nearsighted, and so I've worn contacts for the majority of my life, and they actually have bifocal contacts, which are quite cool. When the eye doctor gave them to me, it was a puzzle. He had to explain to me how they worked. But he said that he thought I'd be very happy with it, and indeed I am. As soon as I got them on, it was really amazing to be able to see things close up. Apparently how they work is the main part of the contact has your nearsighted prescription so that you can see things distant clearly. But right in the middle of the contact is where the bifocal is that helps you see up close. Apparently when you look at things at a distance, your pupils tend to dilate. And so as a result, that more information comes in from that's prescription for nearsightedness, so you can see things clearly. And then when you read up close, your pupils tend to constrict, and so as a result, the focus is more on that bifocal, so you can see things up close. It's been wonderful. However, when I go in again this fall, I'm gonna have to talk about increasing that prescription, that bifocal prescription, a little bit, because I'm on the lowest level this past year, and I definitely need to up that a little bit. So that is something that definitely sucks. For me, I think it's been something that's been building probably over the past 4 years or so. But it definitely starts to happen. Hearing loss also starts to take place. There was a time where the mosquito ringtone was really popular amongst youth. I don't know if you guys have heard of that before. Probably you have, but it was a very high-pitched frequency that would go off when somebody would receive a text message. And it was at a frequency where most adults cannot hear it, but where adolescents and young adults, children, can hear it very clearly. And so, the kids would have this in class so that they could text back and forth, know when a text came in, and the teacher would have no idea. Because they couldn't hear that ringtone. So in particular, the high frequency sounds. They also tell you to be careful of your hearing. Don't listen to really loud headphones, and concerts can be really damaging. And that is definitely true, and you'll definitely feel the effects of that, later on in middle adulthood. I'm still one that likes my music fairly loud. When I lived in Indiana, I went and played bass guitar with a couple of young adults, we just had it turned up really loud. And they told me at that point that, because I was afraid that we were disturbing their parents or their neighbors, they told me at that point that their dad's motto was, if it's too loud, you're too old. And that's something that I've definitely lived by, and definitely something that I'm experiencing the effects of now. Our youngest son tends to talk very, very quietly, and it's very hard to hear him sometimes. It's that combination of getting older and probably listening to things a little loud early on. The other thing that changes in sensation is there's a decline in taste. I don't know that I've experienced this yet. It's something that I hope I don't, because man, I really love food. I love good food. It's amazing stuff, right? Going to a good restaurant or cooking a good meal at home, just something I enjoy. So if that happens, I'm not going to be a very happy camper. Some of the things that start to change internally, there's a slow decline in reaction time. I think I have experienced this. I mean, I definitely grew up as a gamer, loved playing video games. This was back in the day of the Atari 2600s. I actually had an Intellivision. My friend had an Atari 2600 that we would play. Then also when PCs started becoming affordable for families, my family got one, and again, playing video games a lot. Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3, the originals, all things that I loved and mastered very quick. Well, here maybe a year ago, I started playing Agent Dash on my phone, and I just couldn't get very far on it. Got frustrated. Every once in a while, I'd pick it up, and I could barely make it past the first level. Well, I gave it to my youngest son, who at the time was 9, who just passed on his first time the first level, second level, and into the third before he died. I'm like, what the heck is this? So I'm just going to say that that's because of a slow decline in reaction time, not because I suck at video games. Along with that, then it's not surprising that the nervous system is going to slow down a little bit. The stiffening and shrinking of the skeleton starts to happen. So flexibility, you start losing a little bit of your flexibility. And I would probably say that's your natural flexibility. I think it's really important, whether you're athletic or not. One of the most important things you can do is continue to stretch out and keep those tendons and muscles stretched and loose. Before I came to UK, one of the classes I taught at the previous university was wellness and stress management, and I had a massage therapist come in and talk about massage therapy. And she said that one of the most important things you can do is stretch out. And apparently, as a massage therapist, she could tell the difference between the people who did stretch and those who did not. So doing things like Tai Chi, yoga, or just basic stretching, whether you, again, definitely before you exercise, but even if you don't exercise fairly regularly, to help keep that the skeleton loose, muscles and tendons and everything stretched out. Loss of elasticity in the skin and muscles, so you start to get wrinkles basically. Wrinkles, there's a lot of interpretation on them based on gender, which definitely is not fair. But the wrinkles definitely do develop. And I don't know if these products that they advertise on TV actually work or not. Again, it's probably going to be a hit and miss just based on the individual. Accumulation of subcutaneous fat. So you are going to start, building fat reserves, in the belly, arms, legs, hips, wherever you might be prone to carry it. In middle adulthood, you're definitely going to start getting that. I will say again that is something that also sucks. I used to be able to eat anything and as much as I wanted to and not have any effects. Now that is not the case. And then finally, decrease in heart and lung capacity. And again, that to an extent, that's going to depend on the physical fitness level as well as the physical activity that somebody has had, throughout their life from adolescence all the way up to middle adulthood. The more active you've been, the stronger your heart and lungs are going to be. It is never too late to start, even within middle adulthood. So it's just important to maintain a good level, healthy level of physical activity. So some of the sex-related changes, women hit menopause sometime within middle age. Prior to, we'll talk about menopause here in just a moment. Reduced production of estrogen. This is what happens with menopause. Shrinking of uterus and breast size. They might get hot flashes, loss of bone mass, and vaginal atrophy, which means the vagina loses its elasticity. And because of the fluctuation of hormones, the ability to be lubricated also is reduced as well. So that's menopause. Men, they go through something that a lot of people are trying to say it's like male menopause, because there is definitely a change in hormones for men, maybe not as pronounced as it is for women. So for men, there's a gradual decline in androgens production, so basically losing testosterone. Along with that, then there's an increased difficulty in achieving an erection, which is where things like Viagra or Cialis come into play. So menopause happens in around the ages of 45 to 55. Premenopause. So there are these three different stages here of menopause. For premenopause, periods become erratic, and the levels of progesterone also fluctuate, as well as estrogen, which regulates that female cycle, and they're basically what makes a female. And so in premenopause, it's going to start fluctuating. That'll eventually move into perimenopause, which is even more fluctuating, and where the hot flashes start to happen. And those hot flashes probably account for many of the physical complaints around menopause, because I think they would be quite uncomfortable sitting there and suddenly feeling very hot and sweating. Then after post-menopause, estrogen and progesterone, they just drop to lower levels, and then you can see the rest of the things that happen within post-menopause there on the slide. I won't read them. Self-explanatory, I think. Some women choose hormone replacement therapy within menopause, and I don't know if I would say it's controversial, but there are definitely a lot of mixed opinions out there on hormone replacement therapy. So it's definitely something to talk that women who have hit this need to talk with their healthcare provider about. But it basically involves taking estrogen and progesterone as a supplement to keep those hormones up and keep their body from having a real difficult transition through this process. So it does work to alleviate some of the symptoms like hot flashes and pains and things like that, depression. But there seems to be some side effects, but it's not really clear how it's related. So there might be heart problems associated with hormone replacement therapy. Additionally, hormone replacement therapy may increase the risk for developing certain types of cancer. Again, there's some correlations there, but we're not 100% sure what the cause and effect is. That we don't know what's going on with that. So like I said, I don't know that it's controversial, but there's a lot of different opinions out there on whether or not hormone replacement therapy is effective for menopausal symptoms. We talked about in the previous slide that with or 2 slides ago that with menopause comes a loss of bone. It's definitely important for calcium supplements to be taken, or some form of calcium, to make sure that those bones are able to remain strong. And all of that, hopefully both women and men are working with their healthcare providers and keeping an eye on these sorts of things that may come up and that are going to be experienced during this time frame of life. Because a healthcare provider, again, is going to be your best ally. But I would say, whether you go with a healthcare provider or you go the all-natural route to, not take anybody just on their word, whether it's a naturopath or a physician, I think it's almost, there's no excuse at this point to go into some of these things blind. There's so much information out there on the internet, some of it good, some of it bad. But these are the things that we can talk to our doctors about, so we don't have to just go blindly into a particular treatment, but we can be educated and knowledgeable about our healthcare choices. And I think that's really important as we move on with some of these things in terms of treatment and healthcare in throughout the lifespan. So. That's the first part of middle adulthood. The next chapter will pick up on some of the personality and social things that go on within middle adulthood.